Part two of the revision of our Hamlet essays involves trying to reach for the sophistication point. This is the hardest point to get on the AP rubric, and it is difficult to get. It is the cherry on top of a really good essay already. Getting a 4 in the B column is already a really strong essay. And so the sophistication point is just the creme de la creme of an essay. But since we are revising these and it is no longer a timed activity, you have the time to invest in trying to reach for that point and make sure that you get it. There are 4 different ways to get the sophistication point on the AP rubric. The first one is to explore complexities and tensions within the passage or the text. The second one is to situate your interpretation within a broader context. The third is to account for alternative interpretations of the passage or text. And the fourth is to maintain a consistently vivid and persuasive style of writing. So we're going to look more into each one of those ways in this presentation. So first of all, complexities and tensions. We've talked a lot about complexity already because complexity is something that a lot of the AP prompts already ask for. And so we've talked about it being multifaceted, and it identifies ways that there are multiple levels of things going on within a plot. So it might seem contradictory, but yet they coexist. So it is blank, yet blank is the phrase that we use. And tension is kind of the same, except that it means you're trying to pinpoint a moment that characters feel tension, or a moment that there is tension in a text where there are conflicting concepts or conflicting motivations within a character. An example of complexity in Lord of the Flies is that Ralph feels torn between admiring Piggy for his intelligence and mocking Piggy for his awkwardness like the rest of the boys. So that is a tension within Ralph that affects his decision-making and the progress of his character relationships with both Piggy and Jack. In the book, The Handmaid's Tale, which I believe one of you is reading, and maybe you've seen the show that this image is from, the character of Offred believes that her former lover husband, Luke, is alive and well, or that he's been captured and tortured by Gilead, or that he is dead. How can she believe all 3 things at once? It's a complexity. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, really, because it's impossible for all 3 to be true, but it's also possible for any of them to be true. She wants to be realistic, but she also wants to have hope. This is a complexity in the text. In the story of Frankenstein that you might be familiar with, the creature feels angry at Victor Frankenstein for abandoning him, but he also feels sorry for killing Victor's loved ones. The character of Frankenstein is a very complex and character that is he's just full of juxtapositions because of all the emotions existing within him. And that creates internal tension for the creature that affects his decision-making and whether or not he's a sympathetic character to the reader. So let's see how this plays out in an essay. This is an excerpt, or actually it's the entire text of an essay from last year that received the sophistication point for identifying complexities. People develop an understanding of the world and of life in several different ways, depending on who they spend time with and how they spend their time. America has often emphasized learning values from one's family, but always making sure to spend time in society to truly cultivate your personality and identity. In his novel, The Rise of Silas Lapham, William Dean Howell portrays an example and experience of 2 sisters, Penelope and Irene, who, something or other, their main affection and family bond are sheltered from society's attitudes. This was transposed from a handwritten essay, as you see. The social world and the world of the family sit in opposition. The tension between familial intimacy and the inaccessibility of society organize their experience. Howell utilizes descriptors of imagery of the sister's family life, the metaphor of a flower to describe the younger daughter, and contrasts the younger daughter's experience with the young man at Bay St. Joan with her experience at home. So here in the introductory paragraph, we've already pointed out the contrast between family closeness and how society feels distant and unreachable. You have keywords like opposition, tension, contrast. And then down in the second paragraph, I'm not going to read the entire thing to you, but notice that it continues. You have a line of reasoning that continues this sophisticated point of opposition or tension. It makes them look unusually bonded and surprises the reader, given that in the late 1800s, there was a lot occurring in society and work to be done. Rather than actively engaging in what was outside, the Lapham stared out the window and wanted in it. Then the next one goes on to say that Howell utilizes the metaphor of vegetable and flower to convey the sisters' natural state and contrast it with the artificially organized social world around them. So again, you have the contrast between natural and artificial. The girl's beauty was evident but meant little because she had no one to admire her or desire her beauty. Despite her happiness with her family, this shows how her beauty and personality were wasted by her constantly being in the house with her sibling and her family. So again, we have a metaphor that points out this contrast or tension between the opposing forces of nature and society, or family and society. Uh-oh, did I skip one? Ooh. There we go. No, I got them all. Okay. Sorry. I thought there was a third page. So in your essay, you need to go above and beyond what the prompt is asking. Since so many of the AP Lit prompts mention complexity to begin with, it's difficult to see how you might go above and beyond what the prompt is already asking. I will say that complexity typically shows up in the question 3 prompts. So when you are trying to add complexity or tension to a poetry prompt or a prose prompt, then that's going to put you in the upper level of those essays, because those do sometimes mention complexity, but they don't as often as the question 3. Make sure that you pay attention to words that show contrast, like these in the list here, and that will help the reader notice what you are doing with identifying complexities and tensions and how they contribute to the meaning of the work as a whole. It is a low risk option to attempt to do this. The main risk is make sure you don't lose sight of your line of reasoning. Make sure that you don't get so hung up on complexities that you forget the direction of your essay, because again, you've got to try to get that 4 points in row B before you try for sophistication. Another way that you can get that sophistication point is by situating your argument within a broader context. This has to go beyond cliches in the introduction and the conclusion. So just saying something like, in a world where, or in life, all of us, or since the beginning of time, saying things like that are not going to get you the sophistication point. In fact, they kind of hurt your chances because they're so cliche. Instead, you have to think about greater themes and ideas in the passage. You can connect it to archetypes or to a critical lens, like we just started studying. You can connect it to an existing pattern in the world, like something like a Bildungsroman, like coming of age, or a journey motif, or something like that. Also connects to a greater theme. A really strong place to do this is in the conclusion, but you've got to have pieces of it throughout. So here's an example that we can look at. Under the Feet of Jesus is a novel by Helena Viramontes outlining the struggle of an immigrant child living and adapting to life in the United States. She outlines Estrella's time in school and prejudices that hinder her from leaving, and thus ultimately what makes her learning click. In the excerpt from Under the Feet of Jesus, Helena Viramontes develops Estrella into the archetypal immigrant child with difficulties adapting and learning, but who ultimately perseveres through making readers aware and sympathetic to her struggle. So they have used this archetypal theory of the archetypal immigrant child to connect Estrella's experience in this excerpt to an archetypal immigrant child, and that makes it a greater, wider theme. Questions such as those used in the passage to give Estrella inquisitive qualities, but show her ignorance, specifically within the context of her environment. This introduced Estrella as foreign, possibly Latin American, and highlights and foreshadows her struggle developing her character. This builds the sympathy necessary to the archetype described above. The passage ends with a shift that highlights the next section, Estrella's struggle. And so it just goes on to focus on the archetype, but giving the specifics from the passage itself. It demonstrates Estrella's tension between her education and her race. Her struggles were about race and not her own shortcomings. Simply put, the teachers were racists. These themes are important to Estrella's character. Her migrant status is the root of her problems, which builds even further reader sympathies. So it addresses themes of race and migrant status, which are broader themes that are also still relevant themes to modern day. Finally, this passage ends with the entire passage is indicative of larger social problems in the U.S. and globally. Immigrant children were often and are often diminished to their not having had the opportunity to learn something. So this writer uses the conclusion to really drive home the point about the archetype and how it is related to the larger context of immigration and race. I'm not sure. I didn't type this, so somebody else transcribed this and put that note at the bottom. But so it's mentioned throughout. The conclusion is what seals the deal with these two sentences, that they were often and are often diminished to their not having had the opportunity to learn something, all that, but it's still tied to the book. All right, so how can you do this in your essay? Think of critical lenses, think of archetypes, think of the really theme in and of itself should be reaching to a broader theme, but making it connect to a theme that is relevant to today goes a long way, because especially when you're looking at older works of literature, identifying a way that it's still relevant to our world today is something that makes literature timeless and therefore a very valid point and argument to make. In the introduction, the conclusion, and at least in one other place in the essay. What are the risks? If you focus too much on the broader context and not your line of reasoning, then you'll lose points. If you focus too much on the broader context and not the evidence from the specific text itself, then that is also a weakness. The greatest risk, I think, is oversimplifying and making it cliche. You want to avoid that. That will weaken and not strengthen your argument. Time, of course, is always one of the risks in a timed essay, but you don't have to worry about that for the revision. Accounting for alternative interpretations. This is one that it's either there or it's not. There might be an alternative interpretation, there might not be. So an example, some may see the landlady as blank, however, she could also be described as blank. This is something that Abigail Montgomery does in the Gertrude article that you guys read last week. While many people see Gertrude as a minor character, Abigail Montgomery argues that she has a major role to play in Hamlet. And the key to this is that you have to have evidence from the text in order to support your alternative interpretation. You can't just fly off the wall and say that Horatio was in love with Hamlet and that that's the actual point of the play. There's not enough evidence to support that. Another example, in a Frankenstein essay, some people, and this is evidence from like the AP reading, sometimes people try to write essays about Victor's eventual wife, Elizabeth, but there's really not enough information about her in the book itself. So when you are approaching a passage or thinking about an entire novel or play, think about ways, for example, that the antagonist might seem sympathetic. Think about things that we argued about in class in terms of character interpretation. Or when you're reading through it, kind of try to look at a passage sideways for a little bit. Say, well, this is what seems obvious about this character, but maybe, and just try to kind of think about what the evidence might be saying versus what you think it's saying. And by arguing with yourself, you are pointing out that literature can be interpreted in multiple ways and that you are a sophisticated enough reader that you can see both of them. And This is a risky strategy. Right now, there are not any examples that we can look for this one because last year was the first year that we used this rubric and there was only a prose passage. So, and this is something that you're more likely to have in a longer work. And so it works best for the Q3 full novel prompt. Here is the last one, employing a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. This comes down to two things: sentence structure and vocabulary. So we need to boost our word power and we need to elevate our sentence structure. And we're going to work on both of those things in class on Friday. So for example, try using more vivid verbs. And there's a whole handout that is attached to Kidim that has alternate verbs that you can use in your essay rewrite. You can also up your adjective use. Make sure that they are descriptive but specific. What's most frustrating to me as a teacher is when I say don't use words like good and bad, and people say, okay, great and horrible. Those are still not very specific. They're longer words, but the word horrible can apply to a lot of different things. You can have horrible food or you can have horrible sleep, but they mean two different things. You either have tasteless or burned food, or you have disrupted or inconsistent sleep. So you have to use a specific adjective, and that is what is meant here by lively or descriptive. Using similes and metaphors is also very vivid and persuasive. So incorporating figurative language into your own writing can really boost your score. So using similes like these down at the bottom, although I admit those aren't the best, is something that can impress readers as well. Here's an example with some strong, sophisticated syntax. Also about under the feet of Jesus. Like a springboard, there's a good simile, it propels Estrella into a journey of self-exploration when she must first grapple with her anger before she finds the help that allows her to actualize her self-confidence, which had been hidden under her own skin the whole time. Lots of good phrases in there. She stumbles upon a tool chest in the same color of her anger. She may be a child, but her fury is linked to intuitive realization. And it's got some, that pierce her bare feet. So you've got some really good vocabulary in there and phrasing. You've got the use of dashes here. That's very sophisticated syntax. The use of a semicolon up here. The incorporation of quotes right into the middle of the sentence is always a sophisticated move. Whose sunny name foreshadows good things to come. Mimics the overwhelming flood of knowledge. The use of parentheses. These small details indicate that the writer has what they used to call on the old rubric a facility with the use of language, meaning that you as a writer know what to do with words. Words are your tool that you are using to craft your argument, and you have a lot of good tools. Hidden like American secrets that mystified her is another good simile. There are lots of similes in this one. So in order to help you do this, we're going to do some activities in class, but I have also given you these handouts, analytical verbs and language for literary analysis. So I've printed those out for students that are in class. You are welcome to print them. And I may also attach them to the classroom section of Kidim so that you can find them again, or I'd download them to a file that you use frequently if I were you. So this is the lowest risk because in order to really get the point, it has to be consistent. You have to make sure that you are using this vivid style throughout and you didn't just like throw one semicolon into your conclusion and think done. It's never going to hurt your writing at all. It's always going to improve your writing. But in order to actually get the point with it, it's got to be just really impressively consistent. So the easiest strategies to employ would be identifying complexities and tensions, because literature is full of them and it's kind of part of the prompt anyway, and employing a vivid and persuasive style, because that is one of the easiest to employ throughout your writing. But also, do not overlook situating your argument within a broader context, which can be done. This is not high risk. I would not call it high risk. The alternative interpretation may not be highly risky, but it is at least harder to locate, and it's either going to be there or it's not. Whereas these you can do every time. But of course, you have to get that 4 in row B first. So now we are going to do an activity with syntax to help you see about adding that vivid and persuasive style.